Go in case, and we've got the TV in case. But I can't remember which, you might remember Brian actually, or Seb would definitely, was, yeah. Was it 4 years ago when I first came along? But we.
It was another era. It was
pre-COVID, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But we've sort of done the presentation type of things a fair bit. And I think so we can keep it a little bit organic this evening if you like. And I think Mike suggested having a look at the catch to pick up on the stroke, which is a good starting point. So so to start with, what I want to do actually is ask you and how you currently approach it and coach it. What sort of language you use? What are the what are we trying to convey to the rowers? I know we've got some coaches and some rowers in the room, and I guess from Mike's point of view as sort of leading a coaching team, how do you get agreement, alignment amongst coaches? I think so before we open up for answers. The point being, if you're a rower on the receiving end of the coaching, you clearly don't want to get mixed messages from different people, different coaches. You want to get a sense of we all got the right idea about how you start a rowing stroke. So maybe if Mike, you hold fire for a second.
Sure. I think we've talked a lot since September about our finish and establishing the platform.
Yeah.
There's no point talking about the catch until you get to the back end right, in terms of the movement off the back, the separation, the hinge over and so on. So we've spent a fair bit of time on that. I'm sure the athletes will agree. And we've moved on now to making sure the catch is a result of that process.
Right.
We talk about being loose at the front, really not trying to kill fish or murder the water.
Yeah.
We've heard that phrase from me a few times, I think. But to load the blade up as much as you can, and then make sure we press it out. So obviously one of the key elements that we talk about is making sure the blade is down to the water.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of approach we've had in general. It might be good to hear from a couple of the athletes in terms of their perception of that, whether that's right or incorrect.
Can we do that? And don't be shy, like everybody get stuck in.
Yeah.
Whoever, athlete or coach.
Can I just, for me, I think one of the really big things that I've learned needs to be done from my perspective is making a distinction between the entry and the catch.
Yeah.
And I think most people are taught that it's one and the same thing. Mm-hmm. So when people talk about the catch, they are confusing the entry when the blade goes into the water to the catch being where they actually load the blade with the water. And I've tried to spend a lot of time with my crews making that distinction. So
I think that's good.
making sure that the entry is not seen as the point at which the blade is loaded, that entry has to happen before you reach the front end, which is I think what Mike was saying about being patient and loose at the front, because you kind of got to be brave when the blade's working opposite to the direction that the water's going, and then not stepping on it obviously until the blade is buried and you do get that pickup.
So does everybody in the room agree with that, or does anybody see it differently? In terms of how, what kind of description do you use? What's the language? Personally I like that. I think it is an important distinction, but
So I've similar, breaking up in two. I've thought about that blade entry, the key thing there being simplicity, so that if you've sorted everything out at the back end, then all you need to do at the front end is raise your arms, place the blade in the water, and then the tricky bit is then getting that, and then the connection bit, which I think, getting the simplicity is often tricky because a lot, the temptation is to move an upper body or do more. So I've certainly been trying to coach people to almost do less at the front end and try and pare back everything so it's the simplest of movements possible.
So I often say that if we've got quite a few coaches in the room, but if we had 100 coaches or 100 rowers in the room, and you ask people to say, what is a good rowing stroke? Like, what should you do? There's usually pretty good agreement about, preparation, sequencing, length, and the components. But the reality of rowing is that all kinds of problems creep in and mistakes creep in technically. So it's as much about having a clear model about what the stroke is and the catch, what it is, but also balance with, well, the reality of rowing is what goes wrong and how do you fix the problems, really, because essentially what to do is fairly straightforward. Blade has to go in the water, you create load against it, etc. But the difficult thing is, we all know, like, people get it wrong, and they don't get it wrong because they're trying to get it wrong. You know, the other thing I often says, I don't think anybody goes out with a plan to row badly, but you know, some of us do. You know, so I agree with, you know, the idea of, you know, the entry is the entry and the catch is in the water. What kind of things interfere with that process or stop it happening?
It's the response. People respond to what happens in front of them rather than that they predict what happens there.
Yeah.
Like the moment
yeah.
that you, how to say, wait until your strokeman or your seven or whoever's in front of you is picking
Yeah.
blade.
So there's timing.
You will not be able to load the blade because the blade is, I was saying, not entry.
Yeah.
Because you react
So
to what happens.
So the difficult thing about one of the difficult things about the catch is that you just have to do it. You can't really stop and think about it. So say at the finish of the stroke, when you get to the finish, you could pause if you want to, and you could pause for a split second, or you could sit there for 60 seconds. There's choice, you know. If you want to stop, you can stop. But at the front end, you can't stop mid movement. So you have to anticipate it, like Vincent's saying. You've got to have an idea of what it is you're going to do before you do it. But you know, if you're learning and you've never experienced what a good catch is, you're shooting in the dark, really, aren't you? You know, it's like if you've never tasted sugar and salt. They kind of look similar, don't they? But they're vastly different when you taste them. You know, so somehow, as you know, we have to get a sense of what it is we're after, as well as the process by which we get there. So I think quite a lot of the time we spend lots of miles and time building up the process, like, you know, Mike's saying quite correctly, you know, what are we doing off the back end, preparation stuff. That creates the possibility of a good catch, but you still got to have some kind of sense of what a catch is if and when you get it right. So we might come back to that one in a minute, but I think what this is already touching on is that you can look at the technique in various different ways. There's the sort of mechanical side of it, which is you know, the organisation of your movements off the back. You know, what the arms do, what the body does, what the legs do, what position you're in when you get there, the sort of geometry of it. There's the thinking stuff, like Vincent's saying. You've got to think ahead, anticipate, and obviously feel comes with that. You know, at the very least, and then there's qualities like, you know, relaxation and actually one person might be doing it really quite well, but you can be disrupted by other things that are going on, other people, or, you know, swans or narrow boats or anything else that goes on out there in the, you know, so it's sort of I guess, you know, the question is how do we explain it, and explain it in a way where rowers can without it getting too massively complicated, because we could break it down into 10 things or 100 things, or maybe several hundred things if we super analysed it, but I don't necessarily think that's helpful for the rowers. I think you start with the main important themes, and then if you need to go into detail, then you go into detail. Does that make sense? And please do like chip in. I don't want to end up just yakking on. So how do you? Let me ask you again. So how do you coach it, or as some of the rowers in the room, you know, how are you trying to get it right at the moment? Well, I don't know who's a rower and who's a coach, so you have to.
Hands up, all the rowers.
That's quite a few. Good.
So,
There's rowers and people who are rowers and coaches.
So I'd say the way that Paul's been doing with Acri recently is using a front stalks build.
Yeah.
So we'll do like the first inch, which would be, I guess, the catch. So blade in, then the first inch, and then kind of like half legs and then full legs. And he'll speak about the idea of kind of building. So not sort of 100% right at the front. So kind of building as the legs come down, and then obviously the hips and the arms.
Yeah.
But I think putting a lot of stress on the idea that it's not 100% right at the front. So that first inch is very much just about getting the connection.
Yeah.
So the connection is not from putting it in. Connection's in, and then that first kind of movement of the seat is getting the connection on, and then it's kind of like 0 to 100 from there.
Yeah.
I'd say is like, for me, what we've received that is focused on that catch, I would say.
Yeah, we've talked about accelerating handle.
So that's a good starting point, I think. So the if we were going to keep that as a broad theme, for instance, and try and communicate what the idea is, if we're trying to help a rower who's not quite sure, we might say something like, I'm not going to do this because I've got dodgy knees, but do you fancy doing a squat jump for me? Somebody, it's just to make a point, that's all.
Go on, Alex.
Alex says it.
Yeah.
I reckon.
Just mind your head.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, don't.
And the phone.
Okay, that's fine. That, barring dodgy knees and all that age decrepitude, most people can do a squat jump because it's a, it's a pretty intuitive movement. The floor isn't going anywhere, so you know what you're pushing against. You naturally pushed off your legs, extended through your hips, and up you went. So there's a sequence of movement which is very, very similar to the dynamics of a rowing stroke. So sometimes when we get in the boat, it just feels like we've landed on Mars and it's all different and nothing's familiar. But actually, the basic movement is very familiar. And taking your point, the way you develop power, you don't attack the water, you push from the water. So you push off the floor, building velocity and building energy as you go. And although a rowing boat, is moving along, say if you're in an 8 particularly, at speed, there's still a progression to that power. You're right, you can't, if you put everything on the front, how do you build, if you put 100% there, how do you develop that? It's already at its sort of ceiling point, So as a theme, I think that would be an idea, would be, we're trying to, the entry, we've got to get in the water, and then we've got to connect to it, and then build from it. So, I think even if a rower doesn't understand or have the feel yet for all the kind of subtleties of that, as the basic idea is in itself got some power. If we're in the boat and we know the sense of what we're trying to do, that's halfway, I think, towards getting the technique right. It's about the thinking. If you're thinking the right thing, and particularly if you've got all the people in the boat engaged in that thinking, then the movements tend to sort of try and follow that pattern. Whereas if you've got people with totally different concepts about what the catch is, someone's thinking it starts in the air and it's that, and someone's thinking, wait, no, that's not right, it starts down here like that, well, you're at odds. So it's sort of trying to get people discussing it in the right language and painting these kind of pictures and so on.
So I coach novice crews mainly. So we do a lot of rowing in 6s because the set is not there off the back end. So
yeah,
we want to work on the catches. So the things we've talked about, keeping it really simple, is like 2 mantras. First one is that the catch is the last part of the recovery, not the first part of the drive. Because everybody kind of understands that. There's no rowing language, but I guess catch and drive are, but very simple to understand. But the aim being of moving the boat around the water, not the water away from the boat.
Yeah.
And they seem
that's a good example.
get that.
Yeah, that's a basic sort of concept.
Because it kind of talks to the goal of moving the boat round the water,
Yeah.
and they can work backwards from that.
So I'm going to split hairs slightly, because I would say, the entry is the end of the recovery. When the entry's finished, the recovery's finished, and then the catch is the beginning of the stroke, rather than the catch being the end of the recovery. But that is sort of hairs. But
Sorry, I was just going to say, Robin, just
Yeah.
in line with what you were saying about the squat jump, I often use the deadlift as an example, and I just
Yeah.
think of, you know, if you've got to get the bar off the ground,
yeah,
for me, the connection before you start the drive is the point at which you effectively tense up the body to get the bar going. You kind of take the weight of the bar with the body without any movement,
yeah,
and it's from that point then that you gradually build the power. So I think similar, because a lot of the guys obviously do lots of deadlift.
and actually the S&C coaches, you know, wherever you are, they have good language about this. They'll talk about, you know, you've got to first of all have the contact. Even before you brace, you've got to have contact of, oh, there's the floor. I've got to go down to the floor. My fingers around the bar. You know, hopefully get a better position than what I've got. You haven't connected to anything yet, but you're just there. Then you connect, so you've now got some tension against those points. And then they talk about the separation of the bar from the floor, which I quite like in a rowing sense, the idea that you create a contact and you've got to separate the two things, which takes away all those words like drive it, hit it, you know, pull on the hand or anything like that. I don't often use that word of actual sort of, you know, separate the front end, but it's prise or squeeze or lever, those sorts of words are the kind of words which probably convey the right thoughts. And I think and the deadlift or a clean or a hang clean, they're all great examples of getting the mechanics right. And I think in lifting, most people accept that you need to do weights the right way. You know, it goes with it, doesn't it? Like, if I'm going to lift a good weight in the right way, I've got to have good technique. I think generally these days that's accepted. I think, you know, if I think back, you know, to our time, I mean, you just used to do weights with no idea really. We just go down and kind of grab the bar and just, you know, probably lift it in all the wrong way. But nowadays people, I think, they're much better taught. The problem I think though, and tell me if you disagree, is I think they don't necessarily take that into the boat. That what is quite intuitive in the gym, even on the ergo actually, doesn't necessarily, the thinking doesn't follow them into the boat enough. So I think that's maybe another.
But I think that's part of the dynamical component.
Yeah.
What I notice is that most people that when they row off, and you let them start from the catch, or they let them start from the finish, the first stroke they will load up and lay right. And then afterwards, when that dynamic comes in, they don't know what to do with the entry.
Yeah.
And then the entry to the drive. What I've used before, and not yet this year, but it is a component, is always use the analogy of a wheel.
Yeah.
That you want to, like, how do you tap a wheel along the fastest you can once it's already spinning? Like how to say, throw it.
But
You can do that very well here on the bank, like you put your bike on upside down. To say that, okay, wheel is spinning, then you can't slam it because it will not go faster. But if you grab and slam it, grab and accelerate it, that will work. But I think it's a dynamic.
I think it's also getting out of. I think there's an instinctive human question mark thing about if I'm wanting to do something. We're so used to using our arms and stuff, but there's that. You know, a lot of people have that. I would really want to pull this oar, and don't have the sense that actually the connection is not here; it's down there as well. Yeah, that bit. But I think if you mind what's in their minds, a lot of the time it is I want to make this all come towards me quickly, rather than
so
push
you
on
then
foot
need to
plate.
find something which is on the ground.
I think in a minute I'm actually going to pull up some video clips because I think it'll help to see some images, having to have 10 or 15 minutes chatting this through. But I think this is touching on like what's our expectation on the front end, and I think for a lot of us, you know, we got the handle, and in the recovery off the back end, you've got to put the handle back out in front. So the handle is your sort of subject in your head. And when we get to the front, we've got to get the blade in the water. So we're still thinking about the handle, and then we think we've got to get the handle from here to here. So I'm going to pull back on the handle, and that's the one thing you don't want to do at the front, because logically, even though the boat's in motion, if the spoon goes in the water and your feet put pressure against the spoon, that pressure is going to hold the handle where it is because it's on the other end of the oar, isn't it? so we know that what typically happens is people get forwards and they're thinking about the handle, which I think is probably not that helpful. I think it's better to think about the feet. They're thinking about the handle, so they get a movement on the handle. That means the spoon pulls, and then you miss the water. So I think what can work quite well is I think there are four basic bits to the stroke, which I know we'll try and keep it back to the catch, but I'll just use this. So in the recovery, I think so there are two bits or two phases of the recovery and two bits on the drive. So the first bit of the recovery is that the rower has got to get out off the back end, something like this sort of position. So you've got length out through the arms and through the shoulders. The weight here is back over the legs. The knees are unlocked. So the first bit of the recovery the rower has to do. So it's an active movement there. That also releases the hull speed off the previous stroke. And then the second bit of the recovery is the boat should come to you. So a big part of getting the pickup right is how you approach the pickup, because so I'll come back to that. So the first bit is for the rower, the second bit is for the boat, and I think an RP3 or a row perfect's is better for that really than a fixed erg in a way. And then in the drive, we want to push together. So that's the first bit of the drive, is pushing, not pulling or opening. Pushing to the same amount, and then open together. So those four basic phases, I think if you do those things well, I think 90% of your hull speed will come from that. And so the technical model can be, that's a very simple view of it really, isn't it? Is you're gonna push and create some load, accelerate off that load, recover, and then let the boat do some travelling for you. The problem is, of course, people get these bits wrong. So quite often they only maybe come out to sort of here, so they're still a little bit back in the hips, or they're a bit like this, like they're driving the car. But really, we want to get the hands out, or the handle out somewhere across the lower shin, or even possibly the ankle, depending on how tall people are and how flexible. But we want to get that first bit properly out to here. That means that the arms have gone out and there's a shift of weight with your shoulders in front of the hips, so that bit's done. And then they often get this bit wrong. And that's a judgment thing. It's quite hard to get right, isn't it? People either come in too fast, or either under control it and just jet forwards, or over control it. So currently that you commonly see like two approaches to rhythm, and sometimes people argue quite sort of strongly about this, about what you do at the back end. So the one, there's, let me just put my feet in. So you'll have to bear with me and pretend you're looking at a quality young Olympic athlete, all right? So currently you see a lot of rowers sort of row with this kind of rhythm there, but there's this pause point here, or one moment here, like that kind of approach. And like everything, there's pros and cons. One of the potential benefits is that the way that you release yourself and release the slide is it's free, and that's one of the reasons why people, I think, quite like that type of rhythm. The other kind, which is probably, still quite a lot of people still quite like, is to row around the back and get to here, and then have a sense that this is where we control from. But there's a downside to both. So if we do the first one, and we do that, and then do this, the danger is that we're free, but then put the brakes on. Because if you're too free and you're actually overtaking the boat, as opposed to letting the boat come to you. If I go in like that, at some point I've got to get my mass under control to be able to change direction, and the only way I can do that is to put the brakes on the foot stretcher, and that will slow the boat down. So that sort of quicker forward approach can work in terms of letting the boat speed run really freely towards you, but if you end up putting the brakes on late and a bit harder, then it still slows the boat down. And this version of the rhythm, where you get here and then you control the boat speed, you're still putting a gentler force against the boat, but from a long way out. So neither is really going to be that good for what you want to do at the front end. We want the best of both, really. We want to, and I don't think it really matters whether you sit here or whether you move here, really. It's more about, once you've got to sort of quarter slide, is whether you can really tell whether you're going to the boat or whether the boat is just travelling under you, and that's quite a hard thing to get right. But the sort of drills and things you can do, obviously, are things like legs only, and obviously you can do the odd pause stroke here to see am I here, or have I got into the right position, or a pause at 3/4 slide, or even those kind of cutting the cake type drills where you go forwards and come back without going in the water, those kind of things. Just testing out whether you've got balance and control. Because when it comes to the front end, I think this is why I like the idea of a start simple. And I think a lot of us as coaches, we dive in for the full explanation thing, and sometimes the simple answer yields the result. So if we see, for instance, somebody's blade is like doing that, we might say, oh, you've got to lift your hands sooner. But the question really should be, well, why is it doing that? There's a good chance it's because the shoulder's going down, or the chest is going down, or we're coming in too hard. Something is producing the energy for that blade to sky. So we could say bring the hands up, and that might partly solve the problem. But if the real cause of it is too much momentum coming into here, we're just papering over the problem rather than really solving it. So that's why I think those 4 basic phases, I think, are sort of the first things to look at.
Sorry, Robin.
Yeah.
Just thinking about the sort of philosophy of diagnosing a problem rather than necessarily a symptom.
Yeah.
A sort of one of the coaches I had identified that a lot of athletes don't necessarily have the core strength or core stability to sit perfectly still and just raise the handle, to just take the handle weight in the hand, and that hand is only the arm that moves at the catch.
Yeah.
How do you think, just sort of coming back to when we talked about lifting bars in the gym, how do you think that sort of outside of the boat, outside of the ergo, you can necessarily sort of coach that or develop that stability to just sit there and only the handle moves?
Well, yeah, because that's a good question. In fact, I had, can't think who it was now, but it was fairly recently, a coach of some juniors said they're juniors, they haven't got much core strength, so I get them to sit basically really upright and not take any body swing at all. And asked me, do you think that's right? And I hate saying to somebody who's asked a question, expecting a yes, that sounds fine, actually to tell them I think it's wrong, but I thought it was wrong, because the technique that we follow these days is a really safe technique. So you should be able to sit back a bit, and you should be able to rock over a bit, and you should be able to take a length of stroke and load against that safely, even if you're relatively young and don't have yet the full physicality. It's a safe technical model. It's not extreme. We're not talking about crazy heavy loads or anything like that. So the rowing itself is one way that you train it and get better conditioning. But of course, well, what do you say? What do you say when you're talking about core strength or telling somebody thinking how you brace it?
I mean, I think developing all-round trunk strength, and also, I mean, if I was to try and coach it, maybe sort of thinking about work that you can do on Swiss balls, so being able to isolate the movements within the body, because I think it's very easy, particularly in a moving boat, to sort of you get to the catch and you want to, you think, oh, I should be rising up into the catch, and you begin to sort of tip on by opening the shoulders or by opening the hips, as opposed to necessarily just isolating the movements into sort of constituent parts.
But if you think about, I mean, in your head now, think about trying to. I shouldn't be this multitasking, should I? Can't. I don't know if Mike, you could get TV on this time. Okay, your hands have got to rise at some point at the blade. I mean, we kind of know that. But how do you prepare? Let's say you're half slide. How do you? What are you getting ready? What bit of you do you have to prepare? When you're going to pick up, when there's going to be load on the front when you take the catch.
I think we want to be preparing the core.
Yeah. Here. So on the way forwards. Well, let's go. So from the finish, one of the things we're trying to do is to get over into this sort of position with, some kind of reasonable posture, not sitting in the back of your hips here, and not kind of bolt upright like that. Just something, natural position. So we can be loose here and relaxed here. And then as we're getting near the front, and we're going to do that, I think the checklist is, well, what do my legs do? Well, they just arrive and push, and that's pretty simple. There's nothing. There's just kind of two big bones and some muscle. That's what's kind of. The legs don't need too much of an analysis, really. What are the arms doing? Nothing really. They're just hanging on here, and they're not going to get ripped out of my shoulder. So there's nothing much. It's all in neck to coccyx, really, isn't it? That's where we've got to think. So I think the kind of conscious thinking is belly button, and it's just there. The limiting factor is not my legs, and it's not the arms, it's the belly button. So I think an image I sometimes use is, imagine just here, if someone was about to kind of thump you in the tummy or poke you in the belly button, would you be ready for it, If you're not, then that will happen. You kind of deform under load, or compensate by opening in the shoulders or something like that. So I think it's that it is down here, and I think for core you can kind of belly button is just a simple. Everyone's got a belly button. Not everybody quite understands core because it's a bit more defined than just saying belly button, but as a simple kind of coaching or thinking thing in the boat, I think you just say belly button there, because that holds all of this. This is where the energy loss is going to be, either by slipping the seat or opening the hips. We've got to, the football and the handle have got to be connected, so whatever I put on here has got to reach the fingers. If I put, say, twice as much on here as I got here, then I'll get a bum shove. And if I put more on the handle, I'll pull the handle against the feet. So it needs to be sort of, this creates the load, but this has got to receive it without any wastage or slippage. And I think that's where the bracing message comes in. So I think maybe for this evening, that's one of the powerful thoughts.
What I'm normally trying to work into to get that sort of posture is like if you move off the back end and you sort of like follow your hands.
Yeah.
With then once the weight transfer, the sort of the center of gravity moves like down, and therefore you like once the center of gravity goes that way, you will sit loose, but you also will sort of like get that core ready.
Yeah.
Because actually everything is braced that direction, and that will be honestly that makes everything easier. And at least that's
Yeah.
what I'm
You're in a prepared position,
Yeah.
so that goes quite a long way to getting the right kind of outcome. But then there are things like, so what kind of things go wrong? Well, let's say when we're prepared, anywhere really in the slide, we've got a sense, you know, like a tightrope walker with his pole. We've got the feet and the hands, and we can have balance and control there. But when I get to the front to make the entry, I've got to let the weight go from the handle, which means you're just left with your feet for a moment. And when the blade lands and you create the catch, you've got geometry again. So you've got a kind of a geometry here, if you see what I mean by that. Feet and hands and a spoon, you can balance between those things. You get to the front and you have to momentarily let the weight of the oar go, otherwise it can't go in the water. So you're just on your feet. And if you're not on your feet because you're hammering in or you're off balance, then you're not going to get a good entry. And if you don't get a good entry, how are you going to get a good catch?
But would it work that you would say, okay, if you would point the sort of gravity weight down one direction, so like you actually point it diagonally down, that once your hand's in the front, it means that you actually have that control.
Are you in danger then of getting that thing of looking, don't you lose the upper posture with that idea? That would be my concern, I think.
Well, you might do. I think with every idea that we have to describe it, there's going to be a what if it goes wrong, because somebody will get exactly the right idea from what Vincent's suggesting, and somebody else will probably pick up the wrong picture, and that's just the way. That's
with the new juniors, we've been doing a thing of getting them to, before every outing, do some hip hinges with broom handles.
Yeah.
Some squats, but thinking about the quality of the squat, and then ball sits on the yoke balls as well, thinking about engaging the core. And I'd like to think that's been having some effect. At least it's made it easier when they're on the water to say, do you remember when you were doing that? That's you know, that's how to hip hinge. Or do you remember when you do the squat? Think about that. So I found this has been relatively new for me actually, is taking the ideas of things on land and trying to where you've got a controlled environment and put them into the boat.
Yeah, I think that's a really good process. If I can, 2 volunteers this time, people who are young and flexible, it's nothing too big for each other, and link hands like that. Okay.
I do.
Now just sink down together to the floor and stand back up again. Down you go. No, your arms extended. Your arms long. So this is the easy version of it. Look, that's the idea. Okay, stand back up again. But what we're trying to do, like taking Seb's idea, don't go there. We're trying to give people a sense of what they're expecting on the front end of the stroke, assuming they get a really good catch. So now stand closer together. Link hands, but you're going to have to lean back, you're going to have to lean away from each other. So now you depend on each other a bit more. Okay, now same thing, squat down and back up. Ready? Go. Yeah, but
So he rose like that.
We're trying to sort of do it here and not on your biceps. And some people off the front end will just basically hang on their biceps. That's definitely what we don't want to do. So this would be a useful. No, seriously. I mean, it's fun, but I mean, it would be a useful message because it highlights exactly what all you're doing. Your brain is trying to make some kind of muscular connection. So, solve it by doing that. And that's what happens in the brain. People do things sort of unwittingly, but try not to. Okay, just try. So first thing is to lean back off each other so you can sort of feel each other's body weight. Try and leave your arms alone, and all we're going to do is lower from the knees, and obviously hold some sense of posture in the middle bit. So down you go. Okay, and back up. Right, feet closer together, toe to toe this side. Now lean back. Lean back. Try till you're hanging off it. No, right. Happy there? Yeah. Okay.
Quite happy.
No, down you go. Okay, and back up. So not too much. Right. So like using Seb's thought, you could do that as a drill with the rowers and say, well, in the boat, your feet are planted, your handle has got pressure in it because you're hanging off it, but you're creating the load from what you're doing down here. We're not pulling in on the arms or whatever. So it's just a basic message, but things like that. But another point which comes from this is that if we're talking about sweep rather than sculling, you rely on at least one other person on the other side. So if you're in a pair, you need somebody on the other side to go. You can get in the boat and go rowing, unless you want to go around in a circle. Obviously, in sculling, you don't have to have that. But for sweep, you need 2 people minimum for a pair, or 4 or 8. So there's a dependency on each other. Your own technique depends to a fairly large extent on what the technique of the person on the other side is doing. If they row short, you can't easily row long. And a pair really exemplifies this. So in a pair, the lengths have to match up, the arc length. The depths have to match up, otherwise the boat will just corkscrew and tip. The way you feed and apply your progressive power, which we said at the beginning of the session, has to be equal to each other. If somebody front loads it and somebody does nothing and loads up the back, it doesn't work. So you've got to have the same arc, the same depth, the same loading, and yet people are built differently. But there's, so your own technique, you have to have some awareness of who's around you and who you're rowing with, don't you, and work out how you adjust and maybe compensate's not the right word, because that implies sort of settling for something mediocre, but you know what I mean? Sort of just, it stops being theory, it starts being real.
But I think, Robin, it makes a good point about an athlete's sense of what they're doing with their own body, because I think very often, I'll be coaching and the athletes say, for example, I'll say, don't use your arms or use your core, and they'll go, well, I am, but they're not, and they think they are.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the way that you can get around that was with video analysis, because you say drop more weight in the hands, more weight in the hands, more weight in the hands, say, oh, my hands are low, and then you show them video and it becomes clear to them. But I think it's exactly that, particularly when you're talking about core stuff. It's really hard to explain to an athlete what it's like to engage your core. What does that actually feel, particularly for youngsters?
So, and I think especially if it's cold outside at this sort of time of year, you can't sort of sit there for having some long explanation. I think on indoors, ideas like that, sort of little activation ideas, they could take 5 minutes, but I think they're quite a good way of seeing if people get it or not. And I mean, another one is, what can we use here? I need a pair of socks or something. Have we got, what can we use? Something soft.
A pair of gloves?
A pair of gloves, that'd be fine. So, you might have done this thing, but when I was in January, I was away on camp with one of the schools, and we had 15 minutes actually each morning before we went rowing to just cover some kind of theme. Sometimes we looked at videos, sometimes we did that sort of squatting type drill. So this is just another one. So this is again coming back to the idea of what the entry is and what the catch is. So we were saying, like, if you go through a sculling motion, for instance, and because we're on land, we know where the floor is. I know where the gloves are going to be every time. And if I'm bold enough, I can even do it by shut. So that whole proprioception thing on land is quite straightforward, and people can do it. And then we went out in the water. We actually had socks rather than gloves. So the coaching language was, the entry is like, just put socks down, because that was what was fresh in their minds from the land trip. A couple of days later, the idea's old and got stale, and you don't use it anymore. But it just created a theme or an image or a sense. And some of the kids that like to sort of hack at it or whatever, you think, well, you just set the socks down, you just set the blade down, and it did actually have quite a good effect for maybe 15-20 minutes, and then their concentration's not that great, and it would sort of drift off, and the sessions moved on a bit anyway from then, so it didn't really matter. But if we imagine for the recovery ends when we put the socks down. When we stand up, imagine we've got a couple of dumbbells with some kind of weight in them. Well, then that's maybe creating the next part of the image. We can enter the water. There's no gain in entering the water hard, because it doesn't move the boat anywhere. It just probably stops it. but once we're in there, yeah, we've got to engage, and we've got to create a load and a connection, and then accelerate it. Thanks.
Rob, sorry, just as an idea, so we're coming back to that. Have you ever found that in coaching an athlete, sort of getting them to think about their breathing, and in particular filling their sort of diaphragm, almost acts as sort of like a second barrier of trunk strength against which to push, and sort of you can use your breathing to time the connection and the entry of the stroke? I mean, is that something you ever tried? Some athletes have responded well to doing that?
Absolutely, and breathing, again, it depends a bit how hard you're rowing and what your breathing rate is, but sort of let's say you've got yourself over into position here, some people kind of carry on sinking down, in a way of avoiding that, just say breathe in, because if you breathe in you tend to sit taller, so you go, I'd sort of breathe in as you're just about to brace, you kind of get you wouldn't be going and brace, it doesn't really work, you go like that, so you brace against a chest full of air, which helps posture, and so yeah, definitely. And that's another nice, we don't often talk about breathing and rowing actually, but so it's a good reminder. But I'm gonna see if I can get this. Might be fun to try and look at a couple of bits of video. So, a few things I'm going to try and show you. So here we go. So here, first of all, this is an ergo drill, and it's pretty self-evident really. So you I think we might have done this actually here on a previous session. The idea is that all the rower is doing is going through their sequence of movements, so hands away, body over, slide, etc. And the actual stroke there, where she's in suspension, is just a consequence of the coach. Hamish was just holding the handle, so she's got a foot plate and a handle, and she got that sense of body weight connection. Play that one more time. So obviously in the boat you can do that kind of thing as well when the boat's stationary, or even do that backing down drill.
And would you do that as well as a sort of like progression on that one? Like you say, like, okay, I will not tell you when I release the handle? Yeah. Because that's sort of like that they obviously are not knowing when to expect you to release it.
Yeah, exactly. So initially you explain what you're going to do and tell them what's going to happen, and then that would be the natural progression. Is, well, you don't know whether I'm going to let the handle go or not let it go, but it doesn't change the pattern of movement that you apply, because if you row without the handle, say you're in the boat or on the ergo, the quality of your movement pattern can be as good as you want to make it, because there's nothing to interfere with it. Once you've got to actually carry a weight or resistance, it might change your pattern of movement. The fact that you're lifting a weight in the gym might mean that your legs, your bum goes, or you buckle. If you do it like the squat jump, it's a free movement, unresisted, and the quality of movement can be very, very good. You can be completely relaxed, completely smooth and fluid and elastic, etc. When you start having to carry a resistance with you, well then sometimes, quite often, it changes the pattern of movement. So this is about trying to have the confidence that I'm setting myself up, I'm going through these movements with the recovery and with the drive, and if the handle is there, then yes, I'll feel attached to something, but I have to develop it from that point with some patience. So, when we started off, I think we were talking about the the entry and the catch. And a good question really is, well, how much should go on the catch? How hard do you load? I mean, how much work do you put on the catch? That's a question, slightly rhetorical, but what do you think?
Depends on quite a lot of things, doesn't it? It depends on your rig, depends on your angle you're taking around the pin, depends on.
But what's the minimum amount then you want to?
I mean, you want to get bend on the blade early in the stroke so you know it's loaded, you know it's locked in the water, so it's not less than that.
Well, you've also got to match the speed of the boat's going. So if it's, because otherwise you're slowing right near your brake, aren't you? If you're not.
But if you, I had actually a kid who was ostensibly rowing really nicely on the ergo, but his power curve just looked like a frying pan. It was like flat. It looked okay, but so he said, well, what do I have to do? You know, what should I? How much should I be putting on here? It's a fair question that a rower might well ask: is how hard do you want the front end to be? And yeah, it does depend a little bit on the neighbour. It's a single or low rate, high rate, and all those kind of things. But I think the minimum is your body weight is the answer. If you're in the recovery, you clearly have to sit in the boat because that's what the seat's for. The blade goes in, and I think the theme or the idea is that you're loading yourself onto your spoon. So if you were sitting on a pair of bathroom scales, at that point where you connect, the scales would go maybe not to zero, but they'd certainly get a lot lighter. But that's what Polly's doing in that ergo exercise. Like she's connecting her body weight initially quite passively because he lets her just hang there. So I think what I quite like about that answer is it doesn't really matter whether you're a lightweight, heavyweight, big, small, whatever. You are what you are. You need to be on your blade, and whatever length you row, and whatever boat you're in, whatever speed you're going, whatever rate you're at, you need to be on your spoon, not in the boat. You know, your body weight is part of where your power comes from, or your load comes from.
Because if you would like put more weight in it, you just push the boat back. That's another attitude for that.
Yeah, and of course that's I'm just going to find my confused notes. That's the most common thing that happens. So is that we get some negative effect where we're looking to move the boat, but we actually push it the wrong way. So if I show you this video. This is, I don't know, this is just a German women's pair in Lucerne doing this their morning row. Okay, so now if I stop it here, I'd say first of all, they're not that well prepared. So in the bow seat, she's not even got her arms out in front. You know, in the stroke seat, same thing. So that they're at least halfway up the slide and it's not prepared. Now, if they were rowing at 36 or 38 strokes a minute, that would be a problem. And then, I mean, I think I like, I think the video is a really good way of checking on technique. So, what I want you to have a look at is have a look at her seat. When the seat gets fully forward, which is about there, the blade's in the air. Now, what's happening to her seat? It's heading back, and the blade is sliding in, but it hasn't got any build of water on the front. So the fact that she's moving that way means she's putting pressure against the travel of the boat, and this is a really common thing, probably the most common thing in rowing actually. That we push speed off the boat before we put it on.
How do you prevent it?
Well, it's partly about get the preparation right so you're in a good position. So, I mean, I would say from the sort of mechanics and position and so on, she's not really got great posture down here. It's difficult to tell whether it's not too bad, but she's definitely a bit hunched in the shoulders. So there's some sort of organisational stuff which could be better. If that was good, then timing is the answer. So let's find a better. I'll find you another example. Come on. So this is, they do a couple of strokes just practicing the roll up. So that's, let's just go back again there. So they're trying to prepare themselves, and then there, what we're trying to do every stroke is get spoon in the water in the right place at the right time. If the spoon is in the right place, the handle will be in the right place because it's on the other end of the oar. The feet are ready when they're bolted to the boat, and the seat is ready. So you've got four things that we need for a good catch. You have to have a spoon, a handle, feet, and seat. For seat, you can include core. As we saw with that German pair, once you're on the move, typically the seat arrives. So basically, the seat and the feet are where they're ready to start the stroke because the seat's forwards and the feet are already there. But the blade is in the air, so the hands are still moving. And then people change direction, so they've got 2 out of 4 things. But unless you've got 4 out of 4, you won't move the boat forwards, you'll partially move it backwards.
I think the example of Perry is a very good one because there's a couple of feedback things that you can do there. One is when they do it correctly, we haven't discussed this, but you need to reinforce when at the time of need, when they've done it correctly, verbally they need to hear that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
So they can make the connection with whatever they feel, whatever they hear, and it's correct and it's improving. That's when you need to reinforce and say that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
And I think the quandary I think we all have is there's so much going on that we don't really have a context. So now you've given a women's pair, now we have context. So if they did that, let's assume they were doing continuous, and I saw them do that and I was pleased because they'd progressed. That's the moment to intervene and reinforce verbally at time of need, so they associate that feeling with what you are doing as a coach on the bank. Right? The other thing is with a pair, there's another comment. When you film it, if you're off the water, the pair gives you a wiggle. So you can follow that video and actually say, okay, look at how the boat's moving.
Yeah.
That's a very sensitive wiggle, which you won't see in a 4 or an 8.
No.
So the pair is a great feedback instrument because you're half the equation. But also when it's done correctly, I think you asked earlier, so I can but what do you say? Well, it's first of all, can they hear you?
Yeah.
Is it daylight? Have you correctly observed what they're doing? You can't feel what they feel in the boat. So everything that you can do, which is tactile, that you register, I know they're feeling that, and it has a name. That's the terminology you can use. So we one of the warm-ups is cutting the cake. Where's Paul cutting the cake? Cutting the cake, that's one of the exercises. Yeah. Now, if you haven't cut the cake, you don't know what it feels like.
Yeah.
So you'd have to learn that. So I like your idea of going back to reinforcing tactile. Like for example, the exercise these guys did there. They can feel it. Now call it what you like picking up socks. That's a great idea. So when you've got that code, when you've got that verbal cue, that's as much as you can say it at the time of need on the water.
Yeah.
Because on the water you don't you're an oarsman, right? You can hear, and it's like it's not going well, and so the coach then says oh, and you know nothing. And they're right, paddle on.
But I think picking up on that point is that for rowers and coaches, they're usually looking past the entry. They're looking at, I've got to take a stroke. And if they just get in the water at the right place, there's a very good chance they'll produce a good stroke. So sometimes it's worth reinforcing and say, that was you arrived really well on balance and the blade went in, and they might say, oh yeah, but I didn't get any pressure. That's okay. That's going to be the next thing we might look for. But they want everything to be right all at once quite often, especially around the front
which
end.
never happens. Never happens.
So I think the nature of technique is that you sometimes have to look at the whole thing and just sort of let people row and try and work it out through the whole motion. But other times you break it down like a drill like this. So the bit of the drill which I'll show you now is having done the roll up bit, they now add the connection, which I can't remember which.
They're pretty confident and polished so far.
Yeah. Can you see?
Yeah, and that's really.
So what they've done there is, or what they're trying to do is, they're trying to, and the boat's stationary, but that probably makes it harder to balance. But in terms of, there's no movement through the water. They're trying to arrive on their feet in the water and in position with all of those ingredients synchronized together.
Right. Can I go back to the German pair?
And then add some pressure to that. So yeah.
So what we saw with the German pair, you pointed out some visual techniques which you need to correct. What would you have said to them if they could hear you on the bank? What sort of what I think this is the dilemma we all have. You see it,
Yeah. I was
right?
gonna
And
ask
it's
the
like
with the German
what do I comment and
Well-
how do I do it and will they get it? Yeah.
So-
Because at the time of need, that's when you should intervene. You have to be very very go-to.
I think before you can probably say do this and suddenly it's right, you have to know a little bit of a history to this, like what's their idea about how they're trying to move the boat, you know, what has been the development of the crew, you know, they might not want to do, like that German pair, okay, they might not want to slip their arses,
Yeah.
but just are doing it. You might just say, you're slipping your seat, and they go, oh, I didn't realise, thanks, I'll stop doing it. It might happen.
Yeah,
But
I
with
think
them, I think that's not the way they
I
work.
think we need a context because I love the comment about the diaphragm. That's a very misunderstood concept of how you breathe and how you coordinate both training and racing. But also, Paul, you coach a lot of quads, right? So if you're coaching a pair in a quad, the catch is the same concept, but the motor skills, and then the other variable is what level of crew we're talking about. Somebody mentioned juniors. You know, we're not talking really top level international. We're talking really solid club, top level club. So I think if we have a context where we have a scenario, then it's so much easier to apply all of these disparate.
I agree.
concepts.
So you know what I said earlier on about those 4 basic phases is broad, but it's a theme, and I don't think it matters which country in the world you're rowing in or what level you're rowing in. There are certain generic truths about the rowing stroke, and then there are stylistic differences and detailed stuff that comes in. But the generic truth would be you want to create acceleration, you want to have boat or glide, you want to have acceleration creates time, so ratio, rhythm. You know, these are just, whether you sit back in your pelvis, forwards, rock over, no, whatever you do, there are certain common denominators that you want, you know. And then out of that, then you obviously have to add some kind of detail. But I think the kinds of things, so for where I am in my coaching career now, okay, I've had many years of coaching, like 6 years with these two, but coaching at a club or with a crew, you know, every day of the week. And nowadays I roam around as a bit of a nomad, so you get to see different countries, different clubs, different juniors, seniors, masters, everything. And there are, but the main technical themes are exactly the same. You could be looking at Olympic rowers, or maybe not quite novices because they've got to figure out some basic stuff. It's just the level of detail that they're doing it to, but the basic themes are. So this morning I was out with the Cambridge women, for instance, who are rowing at a reasonably high level, but then they weren't opening out and finishing the stroke off, so they pull back on the hand, which means they chase forwards a bit, overrun the boat. You see the stern sheds and spit, exactly the same themes. It's just what the person that you're looking at is looking what's their time in the sport, what's their competency like, what's their conditioning physically. I think we talked about core. Of course, you've got to have some. There's a kinetic chain involved, so you've got to have some physical training behind it. But basic themes, I think, carry. So another one would be, when you let's just go back and have a look at this. So mentioned here, when I was on the yoga, at that point you've got a sense of balance through the feet, bit through the seat, definitely in the handle. When we get to that, at that moment there, where they let the blade, drop in, sort of here, they're really removing weight from the handle. So that's when we have to be on the feet. So that is true whoever you are. It's just that less experienced people will be off balance and doing it, less ably. So I think with drills, this is still sort of fairly theory level because it's like the boat's stationary, it's flat water. First stage of the drill is, can you get positions and arrive and synchronise what's happening at the entry, like I said. Then step two is adding the pressure, and that's chiefly here in the core. There's a little bit of pressure from the feet, and there, it's here. This is where they're holding. The whole boat is in this part of their body, in the belly button, just there. And in fact, I did a little camera interview with Helen some years later and said, can you describe the catch or the connection to me and what it feels like? And what she said to me, she said, well, I feel at the moment when I create some pressure, the whole boat, I've got the hull, the weight of the hull, everything's connected into here. It's not in the handle, in my shoulders, or piling out from the legs. It's just centering into this point here, which connects my fingers and my toes and my spoon and all the distant parts of the geometry. So that was her description. I talked to remember Alex Gregory. I said, tell me how the pickup feels to you, Alex, and he said, he described it slightly differently. He said, I feel, he talked about it in terms of sense of, is there time, or is it sharp, is it fast? He said, it doesn't feel sharp, it just feels like I'm there at the right time. I let the blade fill, even when I'm going flat out, let the blade fill and then push off that point. That was his description. It's like almost as if time slows down in their heads. They don't need to pause and think about it. They can just arrive, connect, and move. But in their heads, it's distilled through a very simple feeling.
Is that because they sort of focus on the core ends? Because, like, how to say, it's not the extremity, but it's here, so therefore, how to say, time slows down because it's not, how to say, far
So,
away.
yeah, it is, exactly. And then, let me just pick out a moving bit of video for you to look at, because let's have a look at this bit. So, when we have these sort of conversations, I 9 times out of 10 find it comes back to what the people are thinking. Not so much about what they're doing, but what they think they're doing. So when you're mid-recovery here, well, not quite mid-recovery, it's just, it's gone into slow-mo anyway. Okay, so earlier we were saying, like, the first phase of the recovery is to reset, and then from here the boat should be travelling under you. If the legs go forwards or compress, the handle will go forwards, and if the legs push down flat, the handle will travel wherever the legs take it, assuming that you've got your arms out and your body weight over. Legs, if the legs come in, the handle will be further up the boat. The legs go back, the handle comes back. So the message to the rowers is your legs, your slide, are actually controlling your oar, not your handle and not your hands, really. You know, it's cutting the cake, basically. If you do legs only cutting the cake, wherever your legs go, that's where the blade travels, the spoon, the handle. So that's it. So, and that then, so part 2 of that idea is that includes the entry. So what the Germans were doing, they were going there, coming out from the front end, missing the water, and then going in. They weren't letting the legs control the entry, they were sliding, overreaching, they were doing it on the handle. So it's a thought, and it's a thought which recently I've tried out on a few crews, generally with a good outcome, is assuming that you've got yourself into a good position off the back end. Your legs, through the rest of the slide, are in charge of what happens on the oar. In other words, when your legs get forward, the handle or the blade is forward. When your legs push, the handle or the blade is going to come with your legs. So there's a window at the front end where your legs come up, and just before they leave, there's a window, a tiny window, for your hands to make that movement. And if you're stiff in the arms or moving around in your chest, that movement will be too slow, too cumbersome, too tight, and the timing window will close because your legs aren't going to hang around at front stops and wait. Do you see what I mean? So it's just for the rower. I think it's that feel between what your legs are doing feet are doing, what your handle's doing, and letting your legs do the thinking. But inevitably, most people, we all think about what's in our hands, and I've got to lift my hands, I've got to square, lift, follow the arc of the oar out, etc., etc. But I think the simple version is your legs tell you when the front end is. So in terms of what catch angle you think you're going to get, 55 degrees or whatever it is, it's not, I don't think it's really about, well, where am I reaching to, where or how long. It's more when. The boat's under me. Now, this is where it is. Doesn't matter whether I'm long or short. This is the right time to be in and moving. And I think when people have the right sort of concept of the front end, then I think the technique starts to sort of shape up. And so I can think of, just in the last couple of weeks, with that theme, not with these guys, but in both cases it was eights, we've been working on getting set off the back end, getting these good positions, and you would imagine that would make the front end really good, but actually the blade time is like like that. But when we said just let your legs control where, what's happening with the oar and when the front end is, the blade work just really tidied up. Now I don't say that will work for everybody every time, but in that particular situation with the lead up to it, it produced quite a sweet result. There's stunned silence in the room.
In terms of you saying that a lot of engagement about the core and getting to the right position at the front end, how much would you think about glute engagement to stabilise that rocked over pelvis and brace against the theme? Because I find in the front 6 inch of the drive, sometimes with athletes rocked over to avoid shooting the seat, I start talking about glute bits. I know it's not really catch per se. Do you find that's a useful?
I don't talk about that much,
Okay.
but I think the one thing you want to avoid is that tuck under that people get, and quite often on the ergo, because people compress deeper on the ergo than they do in the boat. You can see the kind of coccyx slip under at the last minute, and that's something to be careful of. But I mean, your glutes are certainly part of that, aren't they? As I think some explanations are done well indoors. Maybe you need a bit more time with an individual, with the group, to sort of set a theme and actually go through it in a bit more detail. But hopefully you only have to do that maybe once, or not every time. That on the water, I think as you were saying, from outside the boat, what you see are the angles, movement sequences, the mechanical side of things. But inside the boat, it's about, is there time? Is it relaxed? Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it synchronized? Are we enjoying it even? There's all kinds of things that are very difficult to measure, really. They're sort of subjective and stuff. But in the boat, you feel these things completely.
The exercise that you showed us earlier on with the young lady on the Polly, is it? What would you look out for with her doing something wrong? So in the video it showed her doing everything right. You can see that she's kind of suspending and coming off the seat when the coach was holding onto the handle. But if she did something wrong, what would I look out for as a coach?
Well, I think you'd look at, so it's a good question, because what do we look for? I think, are we looking at the mechanical things would be one sort of heading. So you'd say, right, is she sitting well? Is she rocked over? Or, is she getting her length out through here, or is it, is she up? Just as is the geometry and the positioning and all that right? And then if she was doing it continuously, it would obviously be, is there some rhythm?
Mm-hmm.
Is she balanced? Is she falling off the back of the ergo and having to pull back over it? Things like that. So, I mean, you can look at technique lots of different ways, and you could coach. You could coach, for instance, and just say you've all got to get your hands up earlier, or more, or sharper, and that might work, but somebody will probably overbury, and you know, you'll get maybe the right outcome, maybe the wrong outcome. So you just have to then, if that doesn't work for somebody or for the whole crew, well then maybe, I mean, at the front end you can be early or late.
Right.
You can be hard or soft, and you can be fast or slow. To me, they're the sort of the variables.
Right.
And if you and the extremes aren't the answers. You know, it's not fast or slow. You don't sort of create speed just when you get there. It's part and parcel of the movement. But there are parameters there, so you, I guess, have to work out. For someone, you might say you need to steady up. Someone else, you need to let go a bit more.
Right.
And then unfortunately, people say, well, last week you told me I was letting go too much. No,
Right.
but that's
Yeah.
you know, it changes with boat speed. It changes with wind conditions.
Robin, I remember you showed us one of the other times you were here an exercise on there, and it was a bit part of that where it was just literally the suspension exercise on the end. And I remember you got the city rowers doing that just to play around with their body position as well. So I think, Omar, in answer to your question, some of it as well is helping the rowers get that understanding between what their body's doing and what that feels like in different positions, and going, right, no, that it's there or whatever.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time in the boat there's so much variable movement. The nice thing about the erg exercises is you've got rid of all that and you're there, and you can kind of go, yeah, right, can you feel how your back's this or that or whatever, and help them with some of that. And that's one of the things I found very powerful from
A
your
good
answer.
reminder, because I think one of the things that sometimes do on the Ergo is that you can do this you can do it with sweep. It's quite difficult with sculls because we tend to fall in. But and I'm not going to be very flexible on this, but if you want people to feel that low down connection, you just get a boat strap, and you only have to put a boat tied off too hard. Just sort of wrap it around the handle. So you get I get the rower to work out how long the strap should be. So that would be too short. That's too long. So they basically get quarter slide or third slide. They say, right, that's how much reach I think I want to take off the back end. And then as they go forward, like the legs are moving the handle, that idea, because they're directly connected to my hips or the wheels. So for instance, if I try and bum shove, I basically can't,
Right.
because I'm physically connected to the handle.
Right.
If I open my body,
It's gonna be slack.
it goes
Yeah.
slack.
Yeah.
So it's not the same as a boat because it's harder in the boat. It's more things are moving around. But it's a way of showing people, this is where you connect the boat and move the boat. It's here. If someone's lifting and overbearing and it's all up in the handle, there's no real connection. It's the same with that German pair. They would have been. It won't let you bum shove basically.
Yeah.
And then you can also see if I can do this. You can move it up under the armpit. And now I could bum shove because my hips are no longer directly.
Yeah.
That's a bit wrong. But I'm sure you can sort of get to see the idea. Stretching it. Anyway, you get the idea. So now I can feel the role of the chest area, because that also needs to be connected. You don't just connect down here, you have to be connected.
Can you do that putting your hands on your hips and just using your legs and your feet?
I haven't tied this off very well, but
No, just give it a go. Well, assuming that it's connected, could you also do that?
yeah.
So that emphasises the arms are dead; they're not used. It's the top trunk, and then you can say that's the core because you'll feel it.
Yeah.
And you can't do the whole stroke, but you'll do a partial part, and it's tactile, it's Pavlovian, it's stimulus and response. You will emphasise and isolate that part of the stroke which you say, that's called the core. I mean, call it whatever you want to call it. But if we say core, I think of apple core, or you know, the core of the earth, or it's meaningless out of context. But if you do that as an exercise and tactile, you say, that's called the core, you've just made that connection.
Yeah, I think so. In fact, in 2006, when Zach Purchase, in January, broke his scaphoid bone in his wrist doing weights actually, and arrived back in the UK, and Darren Whiting, his coach, took him off to Bishop Abbey, so he was plastered up, and he had a harness made up for the ergo, and he did a month's worth of training without his arms.
No arms.
They did legs only, legs and body only,
Right.
and he won the World Championships.
Wow.
that year.
The other thing I would do is machine, get rid of the plates, so there's no contact with the heel, and have a rotating sort of disc and even no straps, so that the pressure you put on the ball of your feet has no contact with the heel, and it's actually pivoting, so that you can actually get compression. And the way that you're going to apply the pressure must be on a narrow front, and it even pivots to give us a bit of flexibility. So I've got an ergo at home that I'm trying to machine this. I'm going to get rid of those foot plates.
Yeah,
And have it so that you only have pressure on the ball of your feet, and the heels don't have any support. And that would
That's
isolate.
but that's good off the very first bit of the stroke. But I think after that you definitely need the heels though. So I have seen an ergo years ago that had been modified like that. So that exactly as you're describing. But when it comes to ergo technique,
And not have any shoes on. Use your feet.
Yeah.
In socks.
On the ergo, if we're talking about progressive power, and if this is true in the boat too, when the blade goes in and your handle is out long, you're in a long position. This isn't a powerful position, but that's okay, because length is also part of how you make the boat go fast, and you will get into a more powerful position as you sort of unravel. So again, some people are over optimistic about how much they can stick on here, and so when it comes to doing erg tests, I mean, an ergo is a fairly kind of blunt machine, really. Nevertheless, you can still time your power well or badly. So when you're up on your toes here, I always say people don't work against your toes, the balls of your feet, because your heels are up. You just connect, and you can press, and it can be reasonably firm. But when you get back to here and you've got heel contact, now you can really develop power. And those Backlogic foot plates that they produced, which have a foot, toe and a heel angle, were done with the intention, this is 10 years ago now, that you've got good ball of the feet contact here, but you've got very good heel contact when you're trying to develop power in the middle part of the stroke. And if you've got heel contact, it stabilises the knees. If you're up here, you can wobble sideways. When you put your heel down, you get more directional force. So also in terms of, and this is sort of where, I'm a kind of nerd, I suppose, but I find it all interesting, but this is definitely getting into more detail. The muscle groups here, it's balls of the feet, calf muscles, the muscle chain kind of connecting stuff. And it's sort of the lower end of your quads across the knee joint mostly. When you get into heel here, you recruit the upper quads and the glutes and the back extensors, and they're much bigger muscles. So that's where you can really feed the power on. So a bit of people's understanding of how their body works, just like with the squat jump. You're in a deep closed position. You develop appropriate force for the position and length that you're in, and you get more forceful as you.
I'd buy all that. You asked at the beginning, what do you say to the crew? That's a need to know. Do they actually need to know
No,
that?
it is a need to know, but I think it's,
from the coaching point of view, but at the time of need on the water, would you bother explaining that? I don't think you need to know that.
Well,
you probably don't need to know that.
You might or you might not. I mean, I think if you see people regularly overloading the front of the stroke, then you might have some version of that explanation.
I think it's a conceptual thing off the water, but yeah. At the
But
time
it does.
of need,
No, it depends.
It's absolutely true.
These things all depend on one's reading of the context. I mean, you've got to. When we see when we see something which we want to coach or improve, we identify this is what I want to work on, this is why, and this is the benefit, and then you give feedback. It's like, this is the thing, this is why we're doing it, and there has to be a benefit, otherwise there's no point in doing it. And then they need to know, that's a good one, that's a good one, not quite, that's a good one, that's a good one. And that's the sort of, you know, the kind of beneficial communication loop, if you like.
Robin, if I can just
Yeah.
you've had a pretty long day. You haven't been fed yet. So maybe if we, and we did say around about 8 o'clock, so
Okay.
maybe if we can open it up to the floor for any of you have burning questions of Robin. Doesn't have to be necessarily what he's talked about already, but maybe just wrap up in a few minutes' time. If you've got a question you'd like to ask at this stage, Paul's got one.
Sorry, I'm aware I've monopolised time, so anyone else is going. I just had one question about the approach to the front end, because in my mind there are kind of two schools of thought, which is the one that I subscribe to, which is being a bit more patient about building through the stroke, about getting a good grip on the water first. But there does seem to be another school of thought which is coming in quite hard at the front end. So I think for me what epitomises the Scotch College crew at Henley, I think they do that, and to some extent the Cambridge women and Cambridge lightweights. And to some success. I mean, obviously Scotch College were pretty good. I'd just be interested to know, I guess, do you think they'd row faster if they didn't do that? Or do they have a way that makes that work for them? I mean, is that...
Probably the latter, I think. And actually Oxford Brookes, if you talk to Henry Bellhouse, I've asked him the question, I said, you know, what do you put on the front? He said, as much as possible, and keep it there. But I think that's a kind of a crude answer. I don't think that's actually quite what he means. It's like if you know Jimmy Tompkins, he was interviewed on one of those YouTube things. They said, oh, what do you do on the front end? Nothing. He's a triple Olympic champion, so they can't both be right.
How do you interpret nothing? Is that his sort of...
Of course he's doing lots. I mean, he's very clever. He's probably the cleverest rower in the world. It's that whole rhythm thing you talked about, I think, began in the 90s with that Awesome Foursome. They'd finish it off and they'd roll out and they looked like they were really fast forwards, but actually the boat was doing 550 and a Cox's 4 underneath and the boat's moving fast. So but what they were very good at was not just getting to the stretcher, they got back onto the blade. So they didn't get to the stretcher, stop, and then find the water. They found the water as a part of that rhythm, and he actually was super accurate on the front end, and he was 6'7" or something. There was a lot of him on the end of that blade, but for him he was still finishing the stroke with more than what he started. So you know, a saying is, don't pick off more than you're capable of moving or capable of accelerating. And I think so in both examples.
I just wondered if maybe they're sort of a bit shorter in the back end, that they did sort of front load the stroke and dump it all down and then just get back onto the next stroke and pick it.
I wouldn't, personally I wouldn't advocate that ever. I think that the back end, you know, the theme today was the catch, but you know, the back end stuff, I mean, we have on occasion talked about that here too, but I think rhythmically, well, okay, so even if you're a really, really tall person who maybe doesn't need loads of range of movement, you know, I'm relatively small, so, you know, and lightweights generally see a fair bit of upper body range. But however much range you take, your back as a lever is powerful. I mean, you think of martial arts and judo and people throwing. I mean, your back is powerful and the leverage off your hips is powerful. So it seems a shame, for instance, to kind of row legs into arms, which you see a bit of that. You can still get power on the way, but there's no contribution really from this compared to that extension movement.
There's a great example in the Henley finals with Drysdale and Dubrowski.
Yeah.
The Belgian guy.
Yeah.
Stroke for stroke. How much energy? What happened at the catch? How much dive? Who won?
Yeah. I can't remember who did win that one.
Hands.
It was a superb race.
And also there's not
Who did win it then?
No, Dry's are lost.
Yeah, but how many races has he won?
Oh, yeah, don't wait.
4 Olympic medals, 5 World Championships. He's won a lot more than he's lost.
I don't agree with that. But the lightweight versus the Dry's duel,
Sure.
in terms of
Look,
kilojoules per stroke and what they were doing.
There was an American female sculler, Michelle Garrett, who got a bronze at the World Championships, and she kind of rode basically like this, all the way down the field. You can make stuff work. I mean, but if you're in a single scull, do what the hell you like. If you break the world record, fine, it doesn't matter. You go in a double scull, you've got to have some agreement as to how you're going to row, because you can't mix and match styles, can you? And from our point of view of trying to communicate a picture of what we're trying to coach, you start with a sort of a model, and then of course you've got to adapt it depending on what your rowers can do, if they can get into those positions.
Is there a crew at the moment out there on the world's scene that you've really looked at and gone, oh, that's a really nice one to look at paddling in as a good example of anyone in particular that's kind of stood out?
I do actually think our own country, frankly, is somewhere up there. I think Australia has always had a very high standard of technical patterning. The New Zealanders have relied a lot more on heavy training, but and I wouldn't look at Romania or Italy. They're gerbils, but they still get medals and results. But I think in terms of a pattern, I'd say our own crews are pretty good. But like, nobody's perfect, and it's in fact we still haven't managed to release them. But there are 3 technique videos that we're just putting together now. I did show one of them, and it's a 10-minute video about power production to a group of coaches the other day, just to say, what do you think? And they said, well, he's doing this wrong and they're doing that wrong. Well, they are, because they're trying to get better. You won't find a perfect example. You'll find, I like that cruise rhythm. I like their extension or their timing. But if you're looking for bits of video to show, I will stop in a minute, Mike. But I'll just see if I can just get this back up here.
I have a supplementary to that question.
Yeah.
And that is, it takes in a lot of what we've discussed this evening. As a club, we're rowing from, say, M1, where their standard is, the aspiration is to have a very good standard, a high standard, approaching elite standard, down to sort of juniors and knackered old men who started rowing later on in life. Should we look for a club style where everyone can get into, and then teach that as a club to everybody, so that people can get into different boats and can progress, if they're young enough and strong enough, into the top boats? Or should we coach different styles according to the different athlete profiles that we are?
So I would say that I'd have an idea of one style, okay, but I think if you're talking about masters, they might not have the flexibility or whatever, you might probably have to make compromises. I think between juniors and seniors, I'd just coach the model. Rowers need to be able to get in the boat with anybody else and have a good row, and as if they come at it from completely different angles, it just creates problems down the line. I think between men and women, I don't think there's much difference, but I think a difference is around the back end of the stroke, because you see the bigger, stronger guys. Well, I mean, men generally have more muscle mass around their upper arms and shoulders. I mean, they just do. So I don't think it's right, but what they do is that they muscle it in, and you don't see very many women who can get away with doing that. I think women need to row better, basically, because they need to integrate the legs, get the power sequence right. So the feet push off the front. If I start from the front, work my way through the straight. The feet push off the front. That causes the knees to move. The knees cause the hips to open. The hips opening create movement in the chest. The chest accelerating open brings the movement into the shoulders. And the shoulders moving squeeze the elbows through. And because women carry less muscle up here, generally they can't muscle their way out of a problem if the sequence has gone wrong. So I think it's a good problem to have because, as I say, quite a lot of guys do the weights and the power stuff, and then you know they sort of will bully their way out of a problem. But so there's just maybe an awareness of that in terms of the model, but really I think it's a different model. The bit of video I was going to show you would be just sort of to do with rhythm, German 8. Again, this is like, you know, German International 8, but what I like here is around the back end, just the quietness of the release. This was just sort of the morning of a race, but particularly just there, they let the pressure just release from the spoon, and then it's kind of like a soft turn off the back. It doesn't kick out, well, they don't even like row it out. They just, the water releases the blade, and then they let the blade leave the water. So and I think, you know, there are other things which, you know, they don't particularly get a lot of recovery length in the arms and body extension, but you know, they've had very successful crews over 4 or 5 decades now, and you know, when you see that boat, the actual hull, it just hisses through the water. It's just constantly running at speed. You know, they're very composed over the front end. It just looks really simple, but they're rowing along at probably a 1:45 split or something. They're just paddling.
There's no dip in the bows at the finish at all.
But it's sort of the front end, the consequence of that, what they really do very well on the back end. In the end, sort of like if you have that, how to say, relaxation of the back end, you just let the, how to say, blade pop.
Well, I mean, I don't know, but they've had some different coaches over the years, but they've all had the similar look. And I think Martin Sauer, the Cox, is probably one of the reasons for that. He's been around a long time, and he, and in the Canadian women's eights, you know, Leslie Thompson-Willie, she's coxed since 92 until 2012, I think, or even longer. I'm sure in the boat, the cox really understands the flow and the rhythm and the sense of time and composure. So mechanically, you can sort of see, like, he's sitting on the back of his seat and the legs are coming. You say that's wrong, in a way, orthodox, it's wrong, but actually in the context of how the whole boat is moving rhythmically, it's really, really nice. Now when they come out to race the other eights, I can't remember what happened here, but if they come second, I'll be saying to that guy, let's try and fix that, because it might just yield a little bit, but you know, if you move off the bows better, it might actually let a bit more speed out through the hull. If you're winning and you're winning by clear water, it's probably not the most significant thing. You know what I mean? So you just have to balance up and try and triage what are the really critical things we're trying to do, and how much detail we burrow down into. And, you know, there's no right and wrong on this. It's just a sense of it. But I think, you know, I will pull this to a close. But I think, you know, as a club, I think spending an hour or two once in a while talking about these things is, I think, quite fun and interesting, and it just gets you, you know, more on the same page. You can coach with your own individual stamp and personality, but against the sense of what you're trying to do as a group, and I think that's helpful with Mike's super guidance.
Yeah, right. We will come to close there. Thanks, Roy. In Australia, when I was doing coaching courses, I'd always start by saying, look, if you feel you know everything about rowing, you should give up. If you've walked away from tonight without any extra knowledge, then give up, please. Clearly, we've learned an awful lot tonight, and it's been fantastic. And I'm sure the athletes and the coaches over the weekend will get a lot as well. But thanks very much, Robin. That was absolutely fantastic.